I'm withholding judgment on Biden's performance at this point. I mean, I find the rhetoric appalling. I think the idea of coming out publicly with such full-throated support appalling. I find the vetoing of a ceasefire appalling. It's hard to know, according to Marone, the Americans don't trust the Israelis, and they're trying to corral them in the way that they can. And I don't know that what would be more effective. Let me put it this way. I don't have any more reason to believe that if the UN had a resolution calling on a ceasefire, that Israel would obey it anyways. And I don't have a lot of reason to believe that Biden has the ability to get Congress to vote on cutting aid to Israel at this point. I don't know. You've got a country, again, according to the interview I just did, where domestically the general consensus amongst the public, according to Marone, and he is not happy with that, is they want to go into Gaza and level it. And it's not like Bibi Netanyahu and his government of ethno-nationalists and fundamentalists are like, oh, we're fighting against the tide of the bloodlust amongst our population. They're riding the wave, and this is the wave they've been looking for. So I don't know how Biden stops it. I don't know how Biden stops it. And, I don't know in what context. I think we had this conversation on air, but maybe it was with Dan. But AIPAC has done a very good job of disciplining the Democratic caucus. It doesn't need to as much with the Republicans, in terms of don't poke your head up. So, this is the dynamic that we're dealing with. So I don't know. I reserve judgment on the Biden administration and their handling of this until we see what the Israelis do. Because I don't know what would be more effective. I don't know that you could say, I suppose you could say to the Israelis, we're going to cut off your Iron Dome missiles and allow Hamas rockets to fall on and I don't see how that's going to ultimately lead to less devastation in Gaza. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not defending Biden. I'm just.
Yeah, the theory about the babysitter strategy of Western leaders going to Israel to try to maybe restrain their actions a little bit. I like that theory. I hope that happens.
Marone said it is unheard of for Blinken and Biden to have sat in on these war planning
Kathy
meetings.
Hochul just touched down in Tel Aviv an hour ago too. We're sending our whole political class there. But
that's different.
Yeah.
Because Kathy Hochul is just going there because she thinks she's going to be running against Andrew Cuomo, and she may be in the next election. And Andrew Cuomo is, on Sunday, go to your nearest black church in New York City, and Cuomo's there. And so Hochul is working another beat. That's what's going on there. That's different. That's different.
I'm saying there's a liability here too, to the extent that if it doesn't work to restrain Israel, that we've already seen the credibility that the West has with the global South is being just destroyed by this. And if Israel doesn't restrain itself after this, then it looks like we were there planning with them to do all this.
Yeah. I think it's a dangerous, but if we thought that Biden was just sort of like hands off to maintain a different, project a different image and didn't try to inhibit Israel's actions, we'd be pissed about that too. I mean, again, this is like one of those situations where if the last thing on Joe Biden's wish list was anything remotely like this. And frankly, the thing that I don't think that we'll ever understand, because I don't think it's knowable, is to know how much of what we see today is a function of having 4 years of a complete shutdown of our State Department and our foreign policy apparatus during the Trump years. You just don't know. There's no way to assess that. But it's also really hard to believe that having no one minding the store. Remember, there was 1,000 diplomats that were essentially pulled back. We were understaffed by at least hundreds during the Trump years. And it's hard to know. It's just hard to assess from outside of that process. I'm just not, I could sit here and espouse my opinion, but it's very hard to make an educated one. Colleen from Connecticut, could you please have someone on to talk about the Warsaw Ghetto? Don't forget that the IDF assaulted the funeral of that reporter. Could you please? Yes. I have not. Wizard of Us. Finally, in the Northern Hemisphere, so I can catch the show live. Congratulations. Happy about that. Sarah from Chicago suburbs. Hey, guys. Thank you for covering the murder of Wadia. I'm a Muslim Arab American hijabi living a mere 30-minute drive from Plainfield, Illinois. This is the story of that 6-year-old who was stabbed to death by his 70-year-old landlord, a guy who he apparently considered like a grandpa. Myself and others in the Muslim Arab community are heartbroken and paranoid. The demonization of Palestinian Muslims has inevitably spilled into violence on the domestic soil. I'd like to recommend Bassem Youssef's interview on Piers Morgan. His dark humor was poignant and also provided some needed laughs at how ridiculous Zionist propaganda is. Left is best. Israel trying to claim that Hamas carried out the attack on the hospital reminds me of Assad trying to claim that the rebel armed groups in Syria at the beginning of the conflict had the kind of weapons that could destroy people and infrastructure that only a legit army can. Andrew from Vermont must have been one of those other militaries bombing Gaza that took out the hospital. Eric from Michigan, as someone who studies history, I see a parallel between the Hamas festival attack and the Nat Turner slave rebellion. While the slave rebellion included the reprehensible murder of innocent white children, it is illogical to not figure in the brutal system of death and oppression that slaves lived under from white planters, where slaves and their children under state law could be killed and tortured at any time. I mean, I think that for me, the best sort of template to look at some of these things are, one is a moral assessment, and then the other is a very practical assessment, and almost like one that you're looking at like physics. From a moral perspective, there is no justifying for that kind of terrorism and brutality taken out upon civilians. There's just none. There's no moral justification. As a practical matter and a physical matter, if I drop this pen, I know that it's going to land on my desk. And, and if I drop a hammer and I know there's a little glass figurine here, I know it's going to smash that figurine. It is, if you oppress people in any given way, it is highly predictable that you're going to get a horrible reaction. That's why there was fences and drones and monitors and on that border. It was because Israel expected this. The government thought we can stop it. So the expectation is there. That must tell you something. Biden's war. Will Biden be hurt in the election as a result of the Israeli-Hamas war? I have no idea. I have no idea. I wouldn't even know how to assess that at this point. I don't, let me put it this way. I don't know where this thing is going to be in 3 weeks. It's not inconceivable to me that somehow we're going to be involved militarily in some element of this. I mean, I think it's we don't know. And in some respects, like if Israel bombed that hospital, or if it was an errant, Hamas rocket, in terms of like where this goes, again, there's a difference in terms of like what the implications are morally, right? But in terms of like what happens next, I'm not sure it makes a difference. Because Israel, has targeted hospitals before. We know this. This is just the reality. They told people to leave the hospitals so that they could target them. Like, without getting into like, well, because Hamas maybe has an office there or something. Like, who cares? The bottom line is like these things are, what happens next is not necessarily predictable, but the chain of events, if this happens, then that happens, is fairly predictable. And you're already seeing like, the potential for the West Bank to explode. The Israelis have been killing Palestinians in the West Bank during this
against
time.
the Palestinian Authority too.
Protests against Mahmoud Abbas. It's not inconceivable that at one point Hezbollah gets involved. It's not inconceivable that Israel, it says, we got 300,000 soldiers. We're not going to have this again. Now's the time to run the table. And then who knows what happens with the United States. So I don't know. I mean, Biden getting hurt in the election, I can't. I don't know.